Today, October 15th, we're reacting live to this morning's trades. Davante Adams, Amari Cooper, new landing spots paired with Aaron Rodgers and Josh Allen, respectively. What does it mean for your dynasty teams? What does it mean for all the other pieces on these teams involved? Stick around for all that and more. And welcome into the Dyno Construction Podcast. Justin, joined by David and JP. As always, we are ecstatic. This is actually our first live trade review we're doing here on the channel. Really want to dive into the Davante Adams from the Raiders to the Jets. We're going to start with this one here. Of course, we'll hop on to Cooper at the end as well. Now, a trade impacts two teams. Obviously, we're a little bit more excited about the Jets and the impact there. They have a little bit better of a QB. Raiders, not going to talk too much about them. Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 7 in PPR leagues. Davante Adams has only played 3 games, but has been top 20 on a points per game basis with the QB play he had. JP, how are you viewing these Jets wide receivers the rest of the season, and how do their values change?
Now, I do think Garrett Wilson's value clearly changes. It's got to fall here a little bit. Honestly, I'm not super down on him right now, but I think his value has to be lower. Davante Adams, I see as a slight increase in dynasty value. I tweeted this out. Garrett Wilson, he's leading the NFL in targets by a wide margin. He has 67 targets on the year. Now, he hasn't had a bye week yet. Some people have, but the next closest guy has 58. So he's leading by 9 targets. But Garrett Wilson, I expect him to lose a couple of targets a game with Davante Adams in town. Garrett Wilson, out of his 41 catches, he only has 1 that has gone for over 25 yards. Now, on the Pat McAfee show today, I heard Aaron Rodgers say that Wilson has been double covered a lot. The safeties have been shading more towards Garrett Wilson's side, and that's kind of limited his big plays. Now with Davante Adams there, I think Davante, he's going to take a lot of defensive attention, probably the number 1 cornerback as well on the opposing team. And I think Garrett Wilson, even though his targets will come down, I think he's going to be more effective on his catches. Maybe we'll see some big plays, those 40-plus yard plays that we have not seen from him this season at all. But Davante Adams, he was averaging 9 targets per game with the Raiders. I think both of these players are probably at least top 20 wide receiver plays. But that's assuming Allen Lazard is used less, which he should be, but who knows with Aaron Rodgers. But both these guys, I think they definitely could be top 15 wide receiver plays, maybe even top 12 if they have a higher passing volume than we expect. And we've seen this before on multiple occasions that 2 guys can be successful on the same team. But David, how do you view the Jets wide receiver room? Do you view it any differently than what I have?
In a nutshell, I would say pretty much the same. A couple other things I wanted to touch on, though. Like, obviously, like you said, for Garrett Wilson, it does have to lower his ceiling. The fact of the matter is Adams is going to be the first read on most plays, and he's good, so he gets open a lot. That just means he's going to get the most targets. We can't forget, though, Garrett Wilson's still really good at football. He's a really good wide receiver. He's going to get open a lot. And one thing he's never done in his entire NFL career is run a route where he wasn't the best wide receiver on the field. I think, like you said, the defenses aren't going to be able to key in on him, and that's huge. Adams going to get the higher target share. Garrett Wilson's still going to get the ball a lot, and the increased efficiency for the offense as a whole and for him in his new role, I think, is going to help counterbalance that to a pretty solid degree. I do think both these players are going to be useful fantasy players, pretty much lineup blocks going forward. I just did a quick estimate on the new target share, very rough estimate. I was kind of curious for myself what it was and how I think it's going to adjust. But Garrett Wilson at 31%, Lazard 19, the running backs combined 22, tight end 17, and the other wide receivers, including Mike Williams, at 11. Just kind of roughed in some estimates, used Davante Adams at about 9 targets per game like he was getting, made some small adjustments, and this is what I ended up with. Adams at 27, Garrett Wilson at 24, the running backs down just 1 to 22, tight ends down a little bit to 13%, and then Allen Lazard taking up pretty much all of the other wide receivers. I have him at 12% and the others at 3. Who knows how accurate that's going to be, but if we assume the same passing volume, that still gives Garrett Wilson 8 targets per game. Definitely a small notch, but I'm still going to be starting him most weeks. And long term, what do I think it does for him? Well, let's be fair. Another season where he's not producing at a high-end wide receiver 1 level, it's going to make it hard for him to hit tier 1. I thought he was going to hit tier 1. I think we all thought he had a chance at it. Definitely hurts his ceiling, but I still think he's going to be a pretty solid piece to have going forward. Adams, probably going to be a pretty good mentor for him. He's one of the few people in the world that can actually help Wilson improve his release package. I think he's going to help him get on the same page with Rodgers, where we've seen a little confusion before. It's definitely not great for Wilson, but I don't think the sky is falling. As for Adams, he's basically at the age where his value is, what can you provide for me right now? I kind of think that's back in wide receiver 1, at least mid wide receiver 2 production. If you need to go buy some production, maybe reach out, but we don't know what's going on past this year. So, don't overpay for him. Justin, you got anything to add?
Yeah, he's a guy that I haven't been that high on because I've kind of felt like tier one was in a lot of trade conversations sort of baked into the price, right? He's this guy that's ascending. He's going to hit tier one. Aaron Rodgers is going to do it for him. I think a lot of that enthusiasm is kind of leaving now. People have been speculating about Adams coming here for a while, and there's been a lot of concern about him. So if this creates a buy window, I'm very interested in potentially buying. Definitely have some interesting questions to throw at you guys here real quick. I'm going to start with you, JP. Garrett Wilson and a third, or Drake London? Which side are you taking?
Now, before I had Garrett Wilson in a clear tier higher than Drake London. Now it's probably about the same the way I view them. So honestly, I mean, Drake London, he's definitely got a higher ceiling for sure, but I don't think that the difference is still that big for me. So I think I might just stick with Garrett Wilson in the third, but that one's pretty tough for me because London could finish top 5, and I don't think Garrett Wilson has that in his range of outcomes anymore.
And David, Garrett Wilson in a mid first or Amon-Ra St. Brown?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think it's a good conversation too, because previously Garrett Wilson was a good player to help you tier into that top tier. Can you still do it? I kind of think you can. I don't think it's gonna get accepted as frequently as it would have a week ago. I like the 25 class coming up. I'm leaning towards the package, but I could see several teams where I would take Amon-Ra. I think it's a very close deal, but I'm gonna lean the package. And I guess I'll ask you, Justin, so you don't have to ask yourself. Just a positional swap here: Garrett Wilson or Brian Thomas Jr.
My instincts are I've gotta go Garrett Wilson here, but I can definitely, it's so fresh before this trade. Garrett Wilson smashed that side. This is Dynasty. Garrett Wilson, we expect him to be kind of about where Brian Thomas Jr. is at on the season right now. That like high end wide receiver 2 type of production, more or less, right? So if they're having about the same production, but we just like Garrett Wilson, total route package, his pedigree a little bit better than Brian Thomas Jr. The age isn't a big issue here between the two. I lean staying Garrett Wilson, but Brian Thomas Jr. probably has a lot more insulated value. So I think Brian Thomas Jr. might actually be the safe answer here, because even if he kind of struggles at times the rest of the year, it's rookie struggles. We've seen so much. And if Garrett Wilson struggles, like the value could fall off rather precipitously in this. I don't know. I think Brian Thomas Jr., as I talk through the process, might be the safer long-term value, but maybe have a little bit less of a ceiling. Because if somehow Garrett Wilson pulls a Nico Collins and is just the one alpha here, even though there's, all this other target competition, if he outshines Davante over the second half of the season, could look stupid suggesting Brian Thomas Jr., but it's about 50-50, I think. Maybe now, even though I said Garrett Wilson without a question before we recorded, I think I might lean Brian Thomas Jr. by 1% for safety.
Do you think that Garrett Wilson, Brian Thomas Jr., Drake London, do you think they're in about the same tier right now?
I kind of think so. Like after reading all the YouTube comments from our tier video last week, I think that having Olave, Odunze in a tier with London, I think we should have all those guys from below, Reed and BTJ, up with probably Wilson and London here, honestly, almost kind of in the same tier.
Yeah, I've made some adjustments, slight ones since then as well. So yeah, I was wondering if you kind of came around in that same direction.
Yeah, all of the your idiots responses in the comments helped us be that way. Thanks for the comments, guys. Appreciate you all. And moving along to some Davante Adams price points. JP, real quick, let's see if you're a contender. You need production. You have some pick flexibility. What would you be willing to pay for him? JP, go ahead.
It might be slightly lower than what David is, but I would be willing to pay 2 seconds. I know that for sure. I'd probably add on a third, but I think that's probably where I'm maxing out. I personally would not do a first, maybe a 1-2 swap, but I'm not even sure about that just because of Davante Adams' age. And I know he's got that chemistry with Rodgers, so he could be amazing, but I do think that he's just in that kind of Gary age cliff tier, time of his career.
And David, I'm assuming if you have the flexibility, can't do anything else, you're probably willing to pay 2 seconds.
I would do 2 seconds for sure. I think if my first was trending as a late first and I had another first or two in my pocket, I wouldn't spend it 1 for 1, but I think I'd be willing to put it on the table. I would just need something coming back. If it's a second, that's great. I would probably do a 1-2 swap for sure. If it's another player that I feel like can help me in a championship run, it would just depend on the fit and the player specifically. specifically, I would be willing to put a late first on a table if I do have the flexibility and the need there.
If you need a running back, would you do Davante and Dobbins for first?
I think that's reasonable. That's a lot of risk going forward. So, like I said, if I have the need and the flexibility, I think that's reasonable. I would love some confidence in either of those assets going forward to spend a first. But, scared money doesn't make money. So sometimes when you have the flexibility, it's worth making a risky move. That doesn't always pay off. But, no risk it, no biscuit. I don't know how many more metaphors I can come up with or cliches. But
yeah, and on my price point, 2 seconds, I'm happy to pay that. 1-2 swap, I might be considering it. Team dependent. I think the way I view Adams' kind of value increase more so is the exposure I already have to him. I think I have 3 shares, which is, around 20-ish% of my leagues. I think the way I view his value jump is a little bit more of I think his price, because of the production expectation, is probably higher than I want to pay to get any more. So where I have him, I'm more likely to just hold. Like I just think he's like the value people want a first for him. I think is the like when I'm seeing people posting about him, a lot of people are like, I want a first for him, I want a first for him. And I can't see paying that like straight up. Like even David probably the highest on him just because he's seen so much of him kicking butt and taking names in his career as a Packer. It's hard to stomach. So personally, I just see him as more of a kind of hold him if you have him. If you're a rebuilder, try to get that first, but be willing to send a little bit back with it because I don't think a lot of people are looking to pay a first straight up. Now looking at the Raiders real quick, David, Brock Bowers, already a smash start. Anyone else that you view as a big riser with Adams gone?
I mean, the short answer is no, but I guess let's touch on him for a quick second. Jacoby's probably a flex play the rest of the season. He was kind of already a fringe flex play anyways, so I don't really think he changed too much, especially in Dynasty. Trey Tucker should definitely be rostered in all Dynasty formats. I assume he's pretty close to, if not at 100% rostership already, but he should be there. I'm not sure I'd pay much for him, maybe a flyer pick or something. DJ Turner should also probably be rostered, but I don't think I'd do anything other than pick him up for some fab. Outside of that, I just don't care.
All right. Last point of thought. I think for all of us at this point, the Alan Lazard season is over. I don't know if we explicitly said that. Roster him in best ball. Otherwise, he's not really someone we're interested in having starting, etc. It was really.
I might see how it plays out before I cut him, but yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, Tyler Conklin, he was looking pretty interesting, at least as a potential spot start. And yeah, it's hard to see that continue.
Yeah, we expect it to funnel. Definitely. Adams, Wilson, running backs. Now moving on to the second big trade. Amari Cooper from the Browns to the Bills, who really needed a wide receiver one. They were suffering. JP, how do you view Amari Cooper as well as the other Bills pass catchers moving forward?
I think that the player that it hurts most is probably Keon Coleman, since he was the guy that was running outside a lot alongside Matt Collins, who we don't care about. But Khalil Shakir, he had been really good to start the year, and Kincaid, he's been solid. I think these guys see a small dip in volume. I mean, they play such different roles than what Cooper does. So I don't think that their value drops drastically. Maybe Keon's doesn't drop drastically, but for this season, I'm not really interested in starting him. Maybe you probably already were not, though, since he hasn't been exactly what we had potentially hoped. But moving on to Amari Cooper, he's wide receiver 46 in points per game, but throw that out the window, honestly. We know that's mostly due to him having one of the worst quarterbacks and Deshaun Watson throwing him the ball. Amari Cooper, he has the 5th lowest catchable target rate among wide receivers. Josh Allen is way better. We know this. Josh Allen's 59% accurate throw rate on throws beyond the line of scrimmage is the 2nd best in the NFL right now. So this is just a huge upgrade. It's just hard to identify exactly how high do you put him. It's pretty exciting. He could be a low-end wide receiver 1. I think he's more of a mid to high-end wide receiver 2. I view him pretty similar to Adams this year. I do think when a wide receiver joins a new quarterback and offensive scheme that it takes time sometimes to get a full grasp on the system and develop that chemistry with the quarterback. So if we do see a slow start, I mean, he'd be right at the top of my buy low list if he has 2 slower weeks when his first couple of games. And I pulled this up real quick is week 1, even Brandon Ayuk, he had the contract holdout situation, so he wasn't practicing, and he played 60% of snaps week 1. CeeDee Lamb even played 70%. He already had chemistry with these teams and the quarterbacks, but still, since they didn't practice, in the offseason, they still saw a limited snap share. So maybe we will see something like 50-60% the first week, and then it slowly ticks up throughout the season. But David, how do you view the Amari Cooper situation in the Bills?
I think Cooper might be just what the doctor ordered there in Buffalo, right? Like we're talking about. They got some guys that can play out of the slot and make some plays there. Even before the season, we said we prefer Keon Coleman in the slot himself. So you've got, let me try to find this. Mac Hollins is I believe at 18 targets, he's 3 targets behind Shakir, who's their leading target earner at wide receiver. Mac Hollins, I think he's had one season over 30 targets in his career. He seems like a good guy, but he's not who you want as a receiver on one of the most high-powered offenses in the NFL. So we've got this new X receiver in Amari Cooper. That's great. I think his value is similar to Adams. He's older, so what is he going to give me right now? I think he also has a shot at being a back-end wide receiver 1, solid wide receiver 2 kind of play the rest of the season. I'm a little more confident in Adams personally. These are both great situations for these guys. My biggest concern here, like you said, first of all, he needs to learn the offense and get on the same page as Allen. But we also have seen the Bills become a lot more run heavy under their new offensive coordinator, Joe Brady. It's possible that Cooper helps balance that offense a little bit, but I think that's just kind of the mentality that Joe Brady has, is he wants to run the ball first. What's the ceiling? Like I said, I think back end wide receiver 1, I'm just not sure how confident I am in that, because I do think the volume is going to be a little bit less than the Jets offense, which we were just talking about. But I do love it, and I don't know that it hurts anyone too terribly much. I mean, Coleman rest of the season, I guess, but dynasty-wise, I don't know that it changes his value at all.
Given the contract situation, both of these guys, I don't know if we touched on it with Adams, but both of them could be cut with no cap casualty. Adams is owed like $68 million against the cap the next 2 years with nothing guaranteed. So they will probably cut him, re-sign him, restructure him if they want to keep him. But Cooper as well could be gone. Both of them, nothing guaranteed after this year. Given that, that's kind of interesting for me long-term for both of these guys. Cooper is just, what can he do this year? So what you're saying about, if you believe in Coleman, which I don't think any of us do that much, it doesn't really necessarily shake you long-term. As far as Cooper, I expect him to be somewhere between wide receiver 9 and 15 probably in production rest away, where I think I'd put the money on him being a wide receiver 1, just based on when you listen to actual NFL people talk about the best wide receivers. He is a guy who kind of sneaks onto that list as one of the top 10 to 12 wide receivers when a lot of analysts, even defensive backs, are listing guys out. And now he's just got the best quarterback play I think that he's ever seen. Dak provided him some kind of wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, type of range seasons. Joe Flacco did some great things for him last year. Now he's got a guy that can really sling it down the field accurately. I am really excited for him. Kind of, setting that up as, that potential down the season, down the stretch, fantasy playoff kind of star player. What are we willing to potentially pay for him then, JP? This guy that me, brilliant genius over here, is saying is probably, maybe, possibly sort of a wide receiver 1.
So I view him pretty similar to Davante Adams. I probably prefer Cooper just a little bit because he doesn't have that Garrett Wilson factor, to where Amari Cooper, he at least has a path to be a top 6 wide receiver if he really hits the true top end of his ceiling outcomes here. So I like I said with Davante, I don't know if I'd do the 1-2 swap, but I would for Cooper. I would do the 1-2 swap for Cooper personally, but it's not a drastic difference because I do think it'll take him time to acclimate a little bit, and I think Davante will transition just a little bit quicker than Cooper will.
I think for those reasons, and the same reason I would do the 1-2 swap for Adams is why I wouldn't do it for Cooper. I just think I think it's going to take a little bit of time for him to get to that level of an asset. And you could argue if I think he's going to be doing better than Davante by playoff times, isn't it more valuable? Probably, but I'm not sure I even feel that way. I could see maybe a situation where I would consider a 1-2 swap for Cooper, but I just think two seconds and maybe some filler is probably my price point.
Yeah, I definitely prefer trying to package 2 seconds or Jerry Judy a second and a third. I don't know, just some sort of a package, of course. But I do also think I'm a little bit more inclined to go with Amari Cooper than Davante Adams. A little bit lean that way, but probably 55-45 in Dynasty.
Same tier.
Yeah, both older guys. I like that one's a year younger, but honestly, it's really just this year. Like we said with the contract situation, who knows where they'll wind up next year. Maybe they'll go somewhere great. Maybe they'll go somewhere like DeAndre Hopkins did and just try to get the bag. You never really can project out much more besides what their current contract is for production value. So yeah, and then as far as the price point on a 1-2 swap, that's difficult to do for either of these guys. I'd consider it, but I'm really, for either of them, I'm like I said, I'm much more likely to hold them when I have them. I think that the value of these guys is a lot more in what they can provide for your team. I think Cooper's a little bit different the way I approach him than Adams, though. I think my big point for Adams is if you had him, you kind of were expecting him to be about a wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 with the Raiders, even on the bad team, but we were not expecting that with Cooper. So I think what Cooper's kind of expected resurgence does for your team and the flexibility flexibility you have is now there's probably other guys you were starting, Tank Dell, JSN type of tier from our tier video, that maybe now you can move on from those guys. Although Tank Dell without Nico Collins might not be the right example, but just that type of tier of a guy, a T. Higgins type of guy who we don't expect to consistently be a potential wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, can get into that range, that now I'm more likely to try to sell those other guys that were my wide receiver 3 or 4 on the team and capitalize on putting the Amari Cooper points into my lineup. Just from kind of how my processes go, is I try to move someone else higher on the totem pole with a higher trade value, and then now start this guy who has more actual redraft value than he does dynasty value.
Yeah, I think that the point about Davante being drafted higher is a pretty good one. I do think that if Joe Flacco were still there, we probably would have drafted Amari Cooper as a top 20, maybe close to top 15 wide receiver. And I just referred back, and he had a 51-point game last year with Joe Flacco. I don't know if I remember that exactly. I remember him playing well, but yeah, I mean, Josh Allen, he at least gives him that upside to have those huge games. And I think he could have those games like Garrett Wilson had, where he had 23 targets if they're playing from behind, and he could bust out some big, long touchdowns as well. So these guys, they definitely are the same tier, though. I don't think there's much separating them.
So it seems like Justin prefers Cooper, JP prefers Cooper, I prefer Davante. We're all on the same page that if you got a third on either side, you'd take the package no matter which receiver, or is it more than that separating them?
Yeah, I'd take that process 100%.
Yes, I 100% agree. Now, talking about these veteran wide receivers, how would you guys order Amari Cooper versus Terry McLaurin and Mike Evans? I'll start with you, David.
Okay, so like 29, 30, 31, so they're all basically the same age. I think I'm going to go with Evans first, even though he's the oldest. They're all the same tier for me. Again, I would take any sort of plus to go in any of these directions. I just know what Evans can do where he's at. I love the resurgence McLaurin's seen with Jaden Daniels, but we've only seen it for a handful of games, and Amari Cooper's in a new situation. So I think just because these guys are points in your lineup and that's all, I'm going to go with the safety of Mike Evans. But again, I'll take the plus to go any direction.
I think I would have Evans last, so I think that's interesting. How about you, Justin?
I probably would go Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans in Dynasty, because I think Terry McLaurin is going to have a good 3-year stretch here, probably with Jaden Daniels before he kind of slows down. So I do think I'm a little bit ageist here, even though I think he doesn't have the same upside as at least Mike Evans does, just because I think Mike Evans does have top 5 rest of season like scoring in his outcome, because it's just who he is. It's in his DNA. The dude goes for 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns every year. I think he will, after he retires, still put those stats up somehow. I just think that's from the youth perspective, and then I think Amari Cooper or Mike Evans are probably about the same guy, just one is a year younger, so I think I'd take Cooper there. But if you gave me a third to go between any of the guys and the other guys, I would at least do that with Amari Cooper and Mike Evans. I think I'd probably do it with Terry McLaurin too, honestly. I'm not smart enough to know who's going to be best out of these guys.
I was just about to ask you that. Yeah, so I guess these guys, I would say they're all three in the same tier as well. But just hitting on the Browns real quick, since they did lose Amari Cooper, is there anybody that you're really interested in, David, outside of, obviously, I think Njoku, he's pretty interesting, but how do you feel about
Yeah,
that?
I mean, Njoku's definitely, especially with the tight end landscape, got to be interesting. I'm not sure if that even helps him, though, because overall the offense is going to be worse, but the offense already sucks. So I don't know, probably a push in value on Njoku. And then similar to the Raiders, yeah, the guys that are going to be getting the production are worth rostering, like Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, potentially Eli Moore. But I don't care much about any of them. I'm not really willing to spend anything of value to get any of them. I would maybe try to sell Jerry Jeudy if you can, just on the hype, but I don't even know what you're going to get right now.
What would you sell for? What's the lowest you would take for Jerry?
I would probably take an early third. I think you can get more than that, though. I would try to get more than that, but if you're asking what the lowest I'd sell for, it's probably one early third.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I'd probably take a mid third if it's all I could get, to be honest, just to get him off my roster. Maybe this is a bad play, people might say in the comments, but we're just out on Jeudy at this point. Quarterback situation there is atrocious. I think it's a sell window where I don't think you could get a third from him before, and now you can. So a lot of the time, right when a sell window opens up, we try to just say this like main point right here, right? The sell window opens up, you shouldn't ask for much more than your selling price was before the sell window opens up. Just be glad you can get the guy off your team. Of course, the situation has changed slightly. There is, of course, more opportunity for him, but I think we all would agree that Njoku is going to be the first read more than likely on this team, or that's what we'd expect him to be. So I think for the second passing option, or I think at least we're expecting to be the second passing option on a bad offense.
David Njoku or Evan Ingram?
Evan
I'd
Ingram.
still take Ingram. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this quick live day of the trade recording. We're excited to kind of go through this process, figure out how it impacts our dynasty teams, not just the players traded, but all the other players on their teams as well. So thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dyno Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as useful for you as it was for us and for all of us here at the Dyno Construction Podcast. Until next time.